In early 1950s West Germany, the pharmaceutical business raced to supply a public that wanted calm and sleep without danger. One company, Chemie Grunenthal, searched for a product that looked both modern and safe. Sedatives sold well, but many carried a reputation for overdose and addiction. A new drug that seemed gentler could mean a fortune. So researchers built and tested a fresh compound, later named thalidomide, and watched closely for obvious harm. Early lab work appeared reassuring. In the tests the company relied on, thalidomide did not seem to kill animals, even at high doses, and it did not cause the dramatic reactions that made other sedatives notorious. That result mattered more than anything else. It suggested a wide margin between a useful dose and a lethal one. Inside the company, that idea hardened into a conclusion. Thalidomide did not just look effective, it looked unusually non-toxic. With that confidence, the project shifted from cautious experiment to commercial promise. The drug seemed to offer exactly what post-war medicine wanted. A calming pill that sounded safe enough for everyday use, even for people who feared stronger sleeping tablets. The company's focus moved towards scaling production and preparing a market-ready sedative. The critical belief was already in place before the public ever heard the name. Thalidomide was treated as harmless by design. By 1956, thalidomide moved out of the lab and into the real world. The company distributed samples and ran early testing meant to show it calmed nerves and helped people sleep. The key selling point was simple. It seemed hard to overdose on, and it looked gentler than older sedatives. That promise mattered. Doctors and pharmacies wanted something that sounded modern, safe, and easy to use. In 1957, the drug reached the market in West Germany as an over-the-counter sedative. No prescription, no special warnings. It was presented as the kind of medicine families could keep at home and take without fear. Advertising leaned on reassurance, repeating the idea that thalidomide was unusually harmless. The message did not just aim at anxious adults. It reached into everyday life, where sleeplessness and stress felt like normal problems. Then the marketing crossed a line that changed everything. The company's claims expanded to suggest the drug was safe even for pregnant women. That single idea opened a vast new audience because pregnancy often came with nausea, restlessness, and insomnia. Thalidomide started to look like a solution that carried no real cost. When a drug was sold without a prescription and described as safe for the unborn, caution faded fast. String. By 1959, the confidence around thalidomide began to crack. Doctors and patients reported a strange pattern: tingling, numbness, burning pain. Hands and feet felt wrong, sometimes for weeks. The term was peripheral neuropathy, meaning nerve damage in the body's outer parts. It did not look like a simple hangover from a sedative. It sounded like injury, and those reports started to accumulate. In medicine, early warnings rarely arrived as one loud alarm. They arrived as letters, case notes, and uneasy conversations between physicians. Some patients improved after stopping the drug. Others did not. The longer people took it, the more the complaints seemed to fit together. Yet the manufacturer treated the problem as rare, unclear, and manageable. The public message stayed steady, mild, modern, and safe for everyday use. Sales did not slow. Marketing stayed aggressive, aimed at families and at pregnant women who wanted relief and reassurance. The side effects got framed as exceptions, not signals. That choice mattered. Every month the drug stayed on shelves. More people used it for longer periods, often without close medical supervision. The warning signs existed in plain view, but they did not change the product's momentum. Not yet. By 1960, something began to break the expected pattern of childbirth. In maternity wards and pediatric clinics, a small number of babies arrived with arms or legs missing, shortened or twisted into shapes doctors rarely saw. Some had damaged ears or eyes. Others had problems inside the body that were not obvious at birth. One case could be dismissed as tragic chance. A few more started to feel like a signal. The trouble was, no one had a clear reason. These families looked ordinary. The pregnancies often sounded normal until the moment of delivery. Doctors searched for the usual explanations: genetic inheritance, infections, radiation exposure, poor nutrition, bad luck. But the cases did not stay isolated. They appeared in different towns, under different physicians, within the same short window of time. Statistics that once seemed stable quietly shifted. As 1961 approached, the medical system faced a mystery it had not prepared for: a sudden cluster of severe birth defects without a known source. Each new report widened the question: were these unrelated anomalies finally being noticed, or had something new entered everyday life? The most frightening part was the timing. If a cause existed, it had acted months earlier, during early pregnancy, long before anyone realized anything was wrong. By late 1961, the pattern no longer looked like bad luck. In Germany, pediatrician Widukind Lenz tracked a sudden rise in babies born with missing or shortened limbs. Cases that once felt isolated now arrived in clusters from families who had done nothing unusual. Lenz compared dates, pregnancies, and prescriptions. Again and again, one detail kept returning. Mothers had taken thalidomide early in pregnancy, right when the body built arms, legs, and organs. Lenz pushed past the usual explanations because the timing fit too tightly to ignore. He gathered histories, counted weeks, and mapped the window of greatest risk. Then he went public. The claim carried weight because it turned a mystery into a testable cause. Around the same time in Australia, obstetrician William McBride saw his own alarming run of severe birth defects. He checked his patients' records and reached the same conclusion. 2 independent warnings pointed to the same drug. Once that link became public, everything changed at speed. Doctors and hospitals had a name for what they had been seeing, and the scattered reports snapped into a single, terrifying picture. The idea of a safe sedative collapsed. Thalidomide stopped being a reassuring product on a pharmacy shelf and became a suspected agent of harm. For families already affected, the news brought no relief. It only explained the unthinkable. A medicine had caused it. In 1961, once the link to birth defects had been stated in public, the next step seemed simple: stop the drug. But the withdrawal did not happen everywhere at once. Different countries moved at different speeds, and supplies still sat in pharmacies and homes. Some doctors kept prescribing, trusting years of reassuring advertising. Meanwhile, pregnancies already exposed reached their due dates. The consequences did not fade. They arrived on delivery ward scales, one newborn at a time. As 1962 unfolded, hospitals and registries began counting what had previously looked like isolated tragedies. The numbers climbed, and the pattern repeated across borders: missing or shortened limbs, damaged organs, babies who lived with severe disability, and babies who did not survive. Families who had taken a safe sedative faced grief mixed with shock and guilt. Doctors faced the same crushing realization. This had not been bad luck. This had been exposure, timed to the earliest weeks of life. With the scale now visible, pressure shifted from medicine to accountability. Parents demanded answers, and the manufacturer faced investigations, lawsuits, and public outrage that did not stay local. Governments examined how a widely sold drug had slipped through without proof of safety in pregnancy. Withdrawals expanded and warnings hardened. but they arrived after the harm. By the end of 1962, thalidomide no longer looked like a failed product. It looked like a global regulatory failure, with thousands of survivors and families left to carry the cost. By 1962, the United States faced a decision that many other countries already regretted. A sedative tied to birth defects had not yet been approved for American shelves, but a company pushed hard to change that. The application landed at the FDA, where a medical officer named Frances Kelsey reviewed the file. She did not accept the reassuring claims. She asked for stronger proof, especially about safety in pregnancy. The answers did not satisfy her. Kelsey kept the drug from moving forward by refusing to sign off on an approval that relied on weak testing and vague assurances. Pressure built quickly. The manufacturer and its allies tried again and again, sending more paperwork, requesting faster action, insisting the product was already used elsewhere. She held her ground. Then the news from overseas became impossible to ignore. Babies harmed, families devastated, and investigators linking the tragedy to the same drug. Her caution suddenly looked like a national near-miss. The American public learned that a single reviewer's skepticism had helped prevent a wider disaster. And the question changed from whether the FDA moved too slowly to whether the rules had been dangerously loose. Lawmakers responded. In 1962, the United States passed major reforms that demanded real evidence, not marketing confidence. Drug makers now had to prove effectiveness, not just claim it, and had to show safety with far stricter testing and oversight. Thalidomide did not just injure lives, it rewired regulation. In the 1970s, the children affected by thalidomide grew into teenagers and young adults, and the focus shifted from shock to survival. Many needed lifelong medical care, adapted tools, and stable income, but help arrived unevenly. Survivors organized, wrote to politicians, and confronted the companies and governments that had promised safety. Their message stayed simple and hard to ignore. Harm did not end at birth. Compensation turned into long fights over responsibility. Some settlements existed, but many survivors argued they were too small, too controlled, and too dependent on proving individual cases again and again. Families pushed back against secrecy and legal delays that protected reputations more than people. Each court move raised a larger question. When a drug hurt thousands, who paid, and who decided what was enough? By the 1980s and 1990s, public memory became part of the struggle. Survivors demanded recognition in schools, media, and official ceremonies, so the disaster could not be treated as an old mistake. Memorials and anniversaries kept pressure on institutions that preferred closure. The language around medicine changed. Consent, warnings, and patient rights sounded less optional. Corporate accountability sounded less abstract. Thalidomide did not disappear. It returned, but only after medicine found rare cases where its power outweighed its risk. Doctors used it for complications of leprosy and later for certain cancers, especially multiple myeloma, because it could calm harmful inflammation and starve blood supply to tumors. Yet every use carried the same central danger. One pregnancy exposure still meant potential catastrophe. So the drug became a test of whether modern healthcare could control what the 1950s had treated as casual. Prescribing shifted into locked systems, specialist approval, strict patient registration, repeated pregnancy testing, limits on refills, and mandatory contraception rules. Warnings no longer sat quietly on paper. They drove the entire process. If any safeguard failed, thalidomide did not forgive. That reality reshaped far more than one medicine. Regulators demanded proof, not promises. Trials had to measure safety and real benefit, not just hope. Side effects had to be tracked, reported, and acted on fast. Patients gained clearer rights to information and protection, especially during pregnancy. Thalidomide still existed, but only as a tightly controlled tool, never again a household sedative.